With Season 2 of The Last of Us now on the horizon, it seems like the perfect time to revisit the first season of this phenomenal video game adaptation. This story is up there among the most morally complex, thematically thought-provoking, and emotionally impactful I've ever seen in television. The show isn't perfect, of course. The pacing can be weird at times, with an episode or two that could have been almost entirely cut with no real effect on the story, and it seems to forget about the zombies almost entirely halfway through the season. That said, as someone who doesn't play video games, after watching the show, I fully understood all the hype surrounding this game. We need more stories that are this compelling and sincere. They can take such deep, complicated, and sometimes controversial ideas and topics, and treat them with such skill and intelligence. However, not every episode is quite so nuanced, and that's what I want to talk about today. But before I get any further, if you're new to the channel, I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Also, quick disclaimer, as I mentioned, I'm not a gamer, so this show has been my only experience of the story. I just want to get that out of the way and make it abundantly clear so you know where I'm coming from. I'm aware of the biggest changes the show made to the story, and of the game fans' biggest complaints about stuff like the casting. But if I'm addressing things in this video that are significantly different between the show and the game, well, just know that I'm not talking about the game, but since this video is critiquing part of the show, I would be interested to know how the game compares, so let me know in the comments. But that's about everything I want to clear up, so without further ado, let's dive into Episode 8 of The Last of Us. To be clear, I'm not saying that this is the worst episode of the show. I mean, it wasn't a painfully boring, near total waste of time like the episode right before it. But it was incredibly disappointing because it had so much potential. In case you're a bit fuzzy on it, or haven't seen it and don't care about spoilers, this is the episode where Joel is recovering from an injury and Ellie runs into a group of survivors while trying to take care of him. Tensions are high between Ellie and the men, who we later learn are on the verge of starvation, but their leader, a man named David, tries to make peace and put her at ease. It turns out David is a sort of pastor for their community, and he and Ellie have a little conversation about faith. Though she's still wary of his true intentions and not buying into his whole religion thing, it seems like they might be able to get along. Until they find out Joel was the one who killed a member of their group a couple episodes ago. As a result, the men of the community see Joel as a threat and want to find and kill him. And of course, Ellie isn't going to let that happen, so things get violent and Joel ends up needing to go full, Joel, to save Ellie, who also ends up having her own first taste of killing. First taste of killing in combat, at least, and first time doing it on screen. At first, this episode looks promising, fitting in with the rest of the show's trend of blurring the lines between heroes and villains, depicting everyone we meet, including Joel and Ellie, as no more or less than desperate people doing what they have to in order to survive, protect those closest to them, or preserve some semblance of societal order. The more we get to know David and his followers, the more I started to feel like I could see where this was going. And I thought it was going to be the most compelling episode yet, exploring the role of faith within this brutal world, and providing a nuanced look at both the good and bad spirituality can bring out in people. I thought we were going to see Joel and Ellie face the conflict of being forced to kill people they know aren't evil, just scared and desperate. I thought we were going to get to know and care about this community, and then be heartbroken when our protagonists are left with little choice but to kill them to save each other. I thought we were going to get the most morally complex episode of this already brilliant story. Unfortunately, I was wrong. Nearing the climax of the episode, while Ellie is imprisoned by the group, David, who had seemed like a genuinely nice guy with a sincere faith in God and love of his community, suddenly does a total 180 and reveals himself to be a narcissistic, cannibalistic, pedophilic psychopath with a god complex. Oh, and he actually worships zombies. So, yeah, all the nuance goes right out the window very quickly. There were so many opportunities that such a politically, morally, and thematically nuanced show could have tackled in this storyline. They had the chance to explore the ethics of cannibalism in the face of starvation. They had the chance to show how faith helps desperate people endure in the face of horrible circumstances. They had the chance to create the most morally ambiguous and emotionally conflicting showdown of the story yet. Instead, we get the most thematically boring episode, and the most cartoonishly evil villain of the show, who also just so happens to be the show's only openly religious character. Great job with representation there. So, how could the storyline of this episode have been better? Well, there's a number of tweaks I might have made, like removing the first hint that David isn't such a nice guy when he slaps a girl for interrupting him and then refers to himself as if he's God in the flesh. But the main changes I'd make would start when Ellie is caged, so let's jump into the story there and see how this episode could have continued the show's compelling themes in the most morally ambiguous conflict of the story prior to the finale. So in the show, David comes to talk to Ellie after they've captured her in hopes of persuading her to help them and offering her a place in their community. However, rather than revealing he's a total charlatan and going full cheesy villain with the classic "join me and we can rule the galaxy together" speech, like in the actual show, let's imagine he instead simply tells her that the people are scared of her, but that he just wants to help her, to give her a better life. He tells her that she can start over and become a part of their community. She then asks about Joel, if he's welcome to join them or if they just plan on killing him. And David solemnly tells her that his men are still hunting him down and will do whatever they have to. He tells her that they're scared, and as their leader, it's his responsibility to keep them safe. When Ellie defends Joel and says he's not a threat, David asks if he's as dangerous as she is, to which she doesn't respond, and he points out that Joel has already killed one of their men. He tells her that he hates violence, but that he'll do what he has to do in order to protect the people relying on him, and if letting them take care of a potential threat prevents further violence, he'll do it. Ellie then warns him that Joel is more dangerous than they know, and trying to kill him is the worst thing they could do, as they're only bringing hell down on themselves. He seems worried by her words, but he asks her if she could stop what's coming if he lets her go. She seems unsure, and he leaves her to consider what to do next. This bit of dialogue wasn't that big of a departure from the scene in the show as far as I remember it. It's the next interaction between them where things are really going to diverge. When David comes back, Ellie has noticed the severed ear under the bench and asks about their cannibalistic practices. At this point, David does confess what they've done, just like in the actual episode, but unlike in the actual episode, he seems very torn up about it. Whereas in the show, this is where he drops the facade and becomes a total villain. Here, in our imaginations, he kind of breaks down and gets emotional with Ellie. She sarcastically asks what their book has to say about this horrific behavior, and he defends himself by assuring her that they only eat the dead, that they've never killed anyone for food. She retorts by asking if Joel will be the first, and he stops and tells the story of the first time they did it, how his people were dying of sickness and starvation, and some of the men reasoned that they would all join them soon unless they did what they had to do. David was horrified by the idea, but he knew they were right, and he reluctantly allowed it. He tells Ellie that it still sickens him, that he wishes there was some other way, but that these people look to him as a father, a provider, and he's come to love them like children, so he can't let them starve. Like in the actual show, he keeps the truth secret from most of the community, but here it's not framed as a matter of control and maintaining his image, but as a selfless act. He's bearing the weight of their awful actions himself so they don't have to. He's clearly guilty and ashamed as he admits to all this, but Ellie is still disgusted and horrified, telling him they're sick, to which he replies that they are, that all people are, that people are animals, subject to their baser instincts and willing to do anything to each other to survive. He does tell her how the cordyceps inspired him, but instead of that nonsense about them teaching him about love, he tells her that they showed him the truth about humanity, how when society collapsed and people succumbed to the worst within themselves, he saw that there was no difference between the people and the zombies, and he tells Ellie that that's what led him to God, that God is what makes us better than zombies, than animals, that faith and love are what make us human. He tells Ellie that without God, without love, without something to believe in and hope for, we're no better than the monsters. That's why the world fell apart, because it lost that. And then he tells her that he's the one giving these people faith, that they look to him for their hope, and they're barely clinging onto it. Without him, they'd have started killing each other long ago, that Ellie would already be dead. David is the only one keeping the monsters within these people at bay. He's the only one protecting Ellie, which is kind of similar to what he says about himself in the show, except there he sounds like a maniacal narcissist with a god complex, and here we can tell that he hates that responsibility. He feels he's shouldering all these people's sin by himself. He's emotional as he tells her this because it tortures him, and he feels some relief in being able to finally tell someone who will understand. But Ellie breaks his finger, just like in the show. However, as he leaves, he says something like, "I tried to protect you from them, but if you won't let me help you, there's nothing I can do." And she yells after him something like, "Yeah, that's right, show me who you really are. You think you're better than the rest of us? You're just as much a monster as them." After David leaves the room, he has a conversation with James, his second in command or whatever, who asks him what happened in there, seeing his finger. David tells him she won't cooperate with him, and James argues they can't afford to keep her around, especially if she's just going to keep being a problem, as they don't have enough food to go around as it is. David is reluctant, but James asks if he thinks she'll come around, to which David admits that he doubts. James asks what other choice they have, and finally David tells him to get his guys and take care of her. After that, we see David go somewhere private to pray, perhaps even crying as he asks for forgiveness. However, someone interrupts him to tell him that Joel is coming, and he gets his gun and goes outside to find him and take him out. Back in the slaughterhouse, Ellie manages to take out the guys who try to kill her, just like in the show, but then she has to go after David. From there, we focus on Joel and David as they have a bit of a shootout. After pinning each other down, they try to negotiate, with Joel demanding they bring him Ellie, and David, who thinks Ellie's dead at this point, appears overwhelmed with regret as he realizes he should have saved her, and he could have stopped this. He tells Joel he's sorry, that it's too late for that. And realizing what he means, Joel totally goes berserk, losing all fear of death as he goes after David in pure vengeance. He manages to get the best of his opponent, wounding him before he begins to beat the man to death. In this moment, we finally see the fully rage-driven version of the character from the game, as he furiously pummels David to a bloody pulp. However, this is when Ellie appears on the scene, utterly terrified at the gruesome sight of the unhinged monster before her. As Joel sees her, he stops his brutal assault, but his relief turns into horror as he sees nothing but terror in her eyes. It's at this moment that David, not yet dead, stabs Joel, catching him off guard, and prepares to finish his attacker before Ellie fires the killing shot. Joel gets up and runs to Ellie, who turns her rifle on him, still terrified of the monstrosity she saw within him. Initially, he's confused at her reaction. "Ellie, it's me," he says. But as he looks down at his bloody hands, he seems to understand, and we can practically see his heart break to realize how she just saw him. "I'm sorry," he tells her, approaching her cautiously as she slowly lowers her gun. The horror of what she's just seen, and what she's just done, seems to overwhelm her as she breaks down with emotion. He embraces her, holding her in his arms as the same emotion washes over him. "I promise you'll never see that again," he says, as they weep together in the snow. So how does this version of the episode fix it? Well, first of all, here David's a complex, relatable character rather than a caricature of a corrupt, two-faced religious leader. We also get an interesting look at how people deal with such desperate circumstances and how they rely on their faith through them. And we honestly look at the morality of their actions. It doesn't soften the disturbing actions they take or make them any less of a threat to Joel and Ellie, but it does let you empathize with them. The ending was my favorite part of this change, as it still gives Ellie her second experience taking a life, but now it's more emotionally painful for her, because it wasn't just self-defense against this disgusting psycho. However, the part I love most about it is the way it foreshadows the finale in the next episode. Now we've seen what Joel will become if he loses Ellie, and we also know he can't bear to let her see that monster again. So when he commits an atrocity to save her life and then lies to her about it, he's not just trying to spare her the knowledge that she could have saved the world if it weren't for him. He remembers the horror with which she looked at him, and can't bear to see that again. He can't let her see him as a monster. So that's my version of episode 8 of The Last of Us. I enjoy these videos fixing the issues I have with certain movies and shows, so let me know if you do too. I see lots of people online fixing stories they hate, usually completely rewriting them at the expense of everything in them that actually worked, but honestly, most of my rewrites, like this one, are of stories I love, because it's the ones I love that I care about enough to nitpick like this. So let me know in the comments, what do you think of my changes? Are they for the better or worse? Are there any changes you would have made? Is the game version of this plotline any better than the show? What episodes from the show would you most like to change, and how? Like I said, this is by no means my least favorite episode. I would probably have removed at least 20 minutes of episode 7 altogether. But of all the changes I could have made to the series, I feel like this was the one that improved the story the most by capitalizing on all this episode's wasted potential. which is what I try to do in all my rewrites. Let me know if there's anything you want me to tackle next. I hope to see you next time. Until then, never stay silent.